13 says, enter in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many there be which go in therein. But strait is the gate, and narrow is the way that leads unto life, and few there be that find it. And so we have this wide road, as I like to refer to it as, or this wide road that leads to destruction. And here we have this immoral sinner, and he's happy-go-lucky through life. He's just trucking along. He's got women on his mind. He's got booze. He's got drugs. He's got whatever he's got on his mind. You know, he doesn't have any concern for God. He's just living it up. Eat today and drink today, for tomorrow we die. He's kind of defined it very well in Ephesians chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, where it says, as for you were dead in your transgressions and sins and followed the ways of the world. I think that's Ephesians 2. And the ruler of the kingdom of the air, gratifying the cravings of our sinful nature, and following the desires and thoughts of the nature, and we're by nature objects of wrath. So this guy's just, he's on his way to hell. He doesn't care. He's just happy to be living life. Well, one day this guy, though, just kind of gets to the end of himself, and he says, you know, this drug road and this sin road is not going anywhere, so I'm going to become a moral person. I remember once in a church where there was a lady that her husband was on drugs, and she said the church was praying for him, and she said, he quit taking drugs now. And so the church really applauded that. And we're excited when people get off that ugly road of immorality. But yet when I think of this guy, and I know the rest of the story, that he actually went from morality to religion, and he was no closer in religion to the answer than he was when he was running down that immoral path. He was a better husband, but he was a proud person who was not going to trust in Jesus Christ alone as a Savior. And so this was, instead of going to the answer, the open door, Jesus Christ, he just shifted lanes. And shifting lanes won't save you. This guy, in the moral sinner sense, he maybe starts trying to help his fellow man there. He's going to lend a hand. He's going to give money to charity or whatever. But Paul's going to conclude in Romans chapter 2 that you have no excuse, every one of you who pass judgment. For in that which you judge another, you condemn yourself, for you who judge practice the same things. And so just because a person moves from immoral to moral doesn't mean that they've improved really their real lot in life. In fact, they may have moved further away from God than ever before, because now they're helping themselves. Why do I need God? I'm bettering me. I'm going to this program. I'm cleaning myself up. They don't need God a lot of times. They've got themselves. And worse yet, many people go from there to the religious lane. And Romans 3:21 says, you therefore who teach another, do you not teach yourself? Paul said being religious doesn't save anyone. And we're going to see that laid out very clearly in these verses of the end of chapter 2 all the way through the beginning of chapter 3, where we follow these three types of sinners. And we see that the ultimate conclusion of this, not going to church, none of these things, prayer, none of those things save. The ultimate place that all three of those lanes lead is to hell. And the answer is what we're going to see in Romans chapter 3, verses 21 through 31, that the answer is found in Jesus Christ. And so we're going to go down this road, and this is not a pleasant trek over the next couple of chapters. And so, Matt, come on down and share with us the justice of God as we go through this. So he'll pick up from there. Oh, yeah, we need to give you something to be good about.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. very tight. You know what I do?
What do you do? It's way easier than my way. Yeah, I figured out. Am I loud? Am I good? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Matt. We'd like to extend our appreciation for the travel and the time that you've given. This is no small commitment. We appreciate that, and you're going to agree with me more and more as the night drags on. We've got a lot to cover, a lot of information. I would like to say cautiously that as far as DM2 is concerned, the thrill is not that you're here to hear us or that we get an opportunity to practice our skills at presenting a message. The thrill is that it has been proven. You can look at Bolivia, which you'll hear about later. Generation after generation of disciple maker, which is the term that DM2 likes to put forward. Generation after generation carries on without the necessity of a ministry to hold their hand. DM2 is there for follow-on. DM2 is there once or twice a year in each area to present other portions of scriptural instruction. But you can be encouraged that by the end of this conference, assuming all of you can make it through, that with the information you have, you'll have what it takes to go and share this with somebody else. That's particularly exciting to me as a layperson. I have a lot of experience in instruction and public speaking, but that's from the military. That's from a life long ago. I work in an interesting field now. I'm a full-time student at Eastern, so I'm clearly very intelligent and learned because I go to a public university. And between that environment and my extracurricular environment of roller derby, which is an interesting story in and of itself, where I coach, I am surrounded by the full gamut, the entire spectrum of all the people that Brett just overviewed with us here. The irony of my first section in the conference being the immoral sinner, that it occurred to Brett that the first thing I needed to address was immorality, that I was the first name that came up. I'm far too mature to take that personally. I appreciate it, though, because it's where I live. If it were not for this ministry and God's grace in my ability to be active in a local ministry and my beautiful wife and my family and our devotions, I would have no exposure to any morality. I wouldn't have any. I would have educated existentialism for sure through my professors at Eastern, but the rest of my time I spend with a very seedy crowd of ladies who express themselves very violently on a circular track, on roller skates. As we go through the idea of immorality, we still, and I'm speaking from experience, we still want to categorize ourselves in one of the three lanes that we're most likely to be in when we fall. In our weakness, I'm more likely to be a moral sinner, or in my weakness, I probably have a propensity to be a little bit too religious, and I can appreciate that. But when we get to the end of Romans chapter 3, or verses 9 through 20 specifically, and Paul wraps up his argument, it's very difficult in any sincerity to find yourself not guilty in any of the areas that he presents. I want to say kindly, not knowing you and knowing that you're probably wonderful people. I'm assuming you're all believers, of course, and that we've trusted Christ and Christ alone for our salvation. There's immorality in your life. And if you want to raise your eyebrow when I say that, it's not an accusation. It's merely a perspective shift we're going to have to make. And we're going to make it here in verses 18 through 32 with Paul in the book of Romans. Because when he defines immorality and then concludes at the end covering morality and religious sinning, it's all are guilty before God. And you're guilty in every area. And it's an excellent, well-formed argument. So I've got all my resources here. I'm going to step out on a limb and use some digital media to help me. As we're going to read just the first few verses of this section. We're going to start in Romans chapter 1, starting with verse 18. I'm going to try to stay true to the curricula here, and I'm going to read out of my NASB. Verse 18 starts, Paul says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." Verse 19, "Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them." Verse 20, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, verse 21, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. As we look up on the screen, Romans 1:18 through 3:20, the entire indictment that Paul is going to lay out very severely and in a very direct fashion. God's justice is required. And that's a very difficult thing to share with somebody, particularly when you're talking about a subsection of unbeliever, which is the immoral sinner. Think of the last person you had an awkward conversation about religion with. You felt like the Lord wanted you to say something. Maybe you didn't know what to say, and so you say, "Are you going to church Sunday? Would you like to come with me?" "I don't believe in God." Or, nature is my chapel. I worship. I appreciate that there's a God. Or some other awkward, maybe you have, which is very common on my campus, an adamant atheist who maybe doesn't even know why they're an atheist and probably couldn't give you a proper definition of what actual atheism is. They want to tell you there's no God. We know that Psalm 14 decries him as a fool, but we're compassionate because Christ was compassionate with us, and so we want to push this. The first thing they want to know is, if God's so good, why do bad things happen to, this horrible thing happened in my life? I had somebody I loved died, somebody who was a good person died, yet this bad person who's in my neighborhood doing these things on a street corner, they're not dead. Where's justice? And it's a very telling argument, and it's a heartbreaker because you want to be able to give them an answer, but it's difficult as a believer to present a reasoned argument unless you keep it as simple as Paul did and say justice is required. It's on God's timeline when it happens, but it's required and it's coming. And what we forget is, from their perspective, there is nothing after life. And so they can't appreciate that there is a future torment for those people who seem to be living the high life now, but are truly, clearly immoral. Did I do it? In Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32, God's condemnation rightly falls on the immoral sinner. There is an assumption made in the scriptures that we forget to make in a society, a very comfortable and casual society that's very flippant with the gospel. Their assumption is not that there's a God, and that's the discussion point they want to have. But we don't want to argue. We want to maintain that we have a lost person before us, and that the point of contention is that justice is coming and it's rightly deserved. And Paul's presupposition is that there's two issues that must be addressed with a sinner. And the first of those is he's not going to come to Christ until he gets lost. And number two, he's not going to recognize that he's lost until he has a reasoned argument that puts his actions or his nature in the light of the unrighteous. I'm going to share just a general story about the ladies that I work with. I was hired to be their coach, and we had to put some standards, some behavioral standards out there because of the subculture of roller derby. It gets a little raucous, and I was interested in being involved in a team sport, but I didn't want to put myself in harm's way with young ladies dressing provocatively, and I've got all this time away from my house and my wife, and I'm as susceptible to any kind of danger as any other young or old man is. And so my wife goes with me, and we keep things on the above board, and I said, we're going to have to change our uniforms, in that we should wear some uniforms, and we should put our underpants on the inside of our clothing, and we're going to communicate professionally. I'm not interested in your jokes and your innuendos because they stress me out, and I've got a beautiful wife to go home to. And we made these concessions, and it's been going with some success. And I had my first opportunity to witness to a derby girl. She was going through a divorce. She wanted to know why bad things happened, and I got to talk about sin. And she listened against all odds, and she wanted to discuss how to fix her marriage because my marriage seemed to be successful. I've been married nearly 20 years, and I haven't cheated on my wife yet, and I haven't kicked her to the curb, and so she wanted to know what my success was. And I said, what it comes down to is that I don't run my marriage. I've learned some things that are technically you can implement in any marriage, but Jesus Christ rules my marriage, and when I get out of line, my wife lets me know, And the Lord lets me know. And if I want to get out between my bookends of punishment, I need to pay attention. And so I subject myself to the Scriptures. And she wasn't interested in that. Because what she had to say was, I'm a good person. It's very interesting with my experience working in the military, and then I worked as a medic in maximum security prison on death row. And now I'm with young ladies who, by every measure of even a liberal Western society, are clearly an immoral subset of society. Their standards, their boundaries, the things they engage in, for the most part, most people would say, that's probably not a healthy lifestyle. But to the individual, to the very last one, every single one of them can point to somebody else that they're better than. And after talking to them for a while, I find that that happens because as long as they have someone they can say they are not as bad as, then God would not send them to hell. And that's clearly their only standard. There is no intellectual discussion behind it. There is no philosophy or well-reasoned argument. It's because a good God wouldn't do that. So Paul's going to deal with that. Now, the condemnation rightly falls on the immoral sinner. God condemns immoral sinners because they suppress the truth by brazen denial of it. And let's read that here again, just for familiarity, because I'm going to focus for the rest of this time on the repetition of one subject that appears throughout this entire argument for the immoral sinner. For the wrath of God, verse 18, is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. I want to make something clear. In the English usage of the word suppression is not merely an applied outside pressure. When a rock falls from a gated roadside and smashes a pedestrian's car while they're taking pictures of a waterfall, they do not say, that rock just suppressed my car. Now that's silly, and we understand we wouldn't use it in a sentence that way, but the misunderstanding of the suppression is a misunderstanding of immorality. Suppression is the purposed application of pressure solely to prevent the expansion or the release or the movement of another object. You can suppress information, and we see that sometimes in our media, whether we think it's for evil purposes or for the sake of national security. We suppress information. We do not allow it to disseminate. We can suppress an opponent on the mat. In force protection training in the Navy, I had to go and board indigenous people's boats, and we had to do it without permission. And sometimes they were displeased with our presence and they wanted to make a fuss about that. And for right or for wrong, it was our job to suppress that behavior. And we did it typically through means of violence, but in a good military, decent, and orderly fashion. Suppression is the key word, and it's not going to recur anymore as we read, but the concept appears in virtually every verse from here on out, from 18 to 21. Suppression is the thing that is bringing God's wrath. Now, if you remember back to Romans 1, verse 17, God gave us another revelation, and he says, For in the righteousness of God, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed, from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith. Through the revelation of the gospel, God's righteousness is revealed. The very next verse, God reveals his wrath. And I'm very comfortable with this kind of communication. I like to communicate with my children, and I like to be communicated with in this fashion. May I please have a this or a that? If you do this, this is the consequence. Why did you do that? I don't know. Remember the consequence? Yes, sir. Okay. It makes it very easy to keep lines drawn for security and developmental behavior in the family. I love it when the Lord communicates with me this way, because the reason I like to communicate that way is that is the successful way to communicate to me. I am a little bit stubborn. I'm an alpha by personality, as the military would call it. I have had to practice civilian communications, and so now I ask people's opinions, but it didn't used to be that way. I was trained to just say things were going to be a certain way, and sometimes you had to make it that way. The Lord, though he has every right to do that, lets us know that different behaviors that we engage in, which we may do by volition, have different responses. And in verse 18, he's going to reveal his wrath against ungodliness and unrighteousness. Let me warn you that as you read your Bibles, be very careful that when the Lord uses different words for seemingly similar topics, he's not doing it to spice up the writing. In my English courses, they say refrain from repeating words at least every paragraph. Try not to do that. It's unprofessional. It's distracting. The Lord is going to write this perfectly, and he could repeat the same word over and over, and many times he does in his poetry. He used those words particularly for a very specific reason. Romans 1:17 declared the righteousness of God is revealed from heaven through the gospel. Conversely, we saw in Romans 1:18, it declares the wrath of God is revealed against all ungodliness. As we read the beginning of Romans 1:18 again, you see that man needs God's righteousness because in his sinful state, he stands directly under God's wrath. I want to remind you again that there is no assumption that God may not have a reason to both indict and execute judgment against man. If I could distract you for a moment and ask you to turn with me to Psalm 90. As I was preparing for this, they passed out the announcements and the brochures in church. The front cover had Psalm 90 on it, and this verse slapped me in the face, and it helped me to understand the direction I was supposed to go with this. Psalm 90 says, and I believe as I'm slowly turning there, in verse 2, it says, "Before the mountains were born, or you gave birth to the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God." Now that's important because the next thing we're going to step into is the general revelation of creation and the wonderful grace God has bestowed upon us that even if we haven't had any biblical instruction, because my family or my community or my nation has suppressed the truth and I have not been exposed to the gospel, I can still have a knowledge of the creator of the universe. And that general revelation is brought specifically by God's grace. And it's very hard to argue against the judge who indicts you and condemns you and brings accusation after accusation after accusation, and nobody has a question that you're guilty, and then offers you grace. It makes it very easy to listen to that kind of person. And when people have difficulty with the idea of submitting to authority, they're not going to submit to the authority of some God they've never met before. And when you begin to show them the indictments, they become defensive, and they don't want to hear it. It makes it very easy to share the gospel with them when you can say, but God gave his son for you. He showed his love toward you in that while we were yet sinners, he died for us. There is an answer to the despair you're feeling if you can get past your initial response. If you can hear the rest of the gospel, there's hope for you. I'm going to tell you what, you want to make me angry, I want you to put on display in front of everybody the things that I'm weak at. I will defend myself. I have a particular image I uphold for the sake of my daughters. I look like a gruff and hard to approach individual, and I like that. It's a badge I wear. I don't do it because I want people to dislike me. I just want them to think twice before they approach my children. It helps me in my employment. It buys me grace with instructors at school. People don't want to argue because they assume that by the way I carry myself, I'm going to be angry. I have the propensity to act that way, and I have the same propensity you have to do that when presented by the gospel and the accusations of Scripture, to rebel against that. And so we've got to be very careful as we present this to the immoral sinner. Man needs God's righteousness because in his sinful state he stands directly under God's wrath. That was Romans 1:18 again. Man's ungodliness and unrighteousness violate God's righteous character. Therefore, God must respond in wrath. No, he doesn't. He could forgive us. Doesn't he know we're weak? Yes, he knows we're weak. He sent his son as our high priest to prove by the end of the whole ordeal that he understood the weakness of man because he bore our sinful flesh, or our weak flesh, in his sinless nature. he fully understands that, but we still ask the question, why would he do that? Why do babies die? How come if Jesus died for the sins of the world, why do I have to go to hell for my sin? Adam and Eve didn't ask the question, they just did what they were supposed to do. We don't fully understand all the aspects of God's nature, or he wouldn't be God. But we understand, based on the truth of the Scriptures, that God cannot allow, we know that sin in no wise will enter the kingdom of heaven. We know that the very transgression of God's law is sin, and that we know that the wages of sin is death. And God's consistency of character and his justice, which, it's interesting, we don't want God's justice for us when it comes to our sin, but when somebody breaks into my car and I catch him in the act, I certainly want God's justice against him for what he just did to me. I don't want God's justice for my lies. I don't want God's justice for my thoughts, but I want God's justice for your gossip. Now, let's be clear on that. I would demand that somebody do something about you talking about my wife or me behind my back. It's just not right. You shouldn't do that. But I've done it. And let's be clear, I don't want God's justice for me in those areas. So there's an inconsistency that we struggle with the idea of perfection and eternity, trying to bring that down to our level so that we can understand it from a carnal perspective. And we try to marry that mercy and that grace completely devoid of the righteousness and the judgment. You don't believe me? Go to a church where the songs you would have difficulty identifying them as Christian songs if you listen to the lyrics or the tunes, where the preaching is phenomenal for the children, and they have an enormous youth group, and the adults spend the majority of their time waving their hands to quasi-rock music, and that's just from my perspective. Listen to the preaching, and I want you to count the number of times you hear love and grace, and then count that and compare that to the pitiful number of times you hear about sin or repentance or unrighteousness. It's out of control in our culture. And the proof of that is that you're here to get a better grasp on the basic concepts of the book of Romans, which deal with sin and ungodliness and unrighteousness. Because we're having a hard time in this new culture explaining it to people, but it seems so simple. It made sense to me. Why can't I explain it to this girl who has these very easy problems to deal with if she would just trust Christ? Okay, so I mentioned that God used two words, Paul used through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, two words, ungodliness and unrighteousness. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but we talked about suppression, and I mentioned that I wanted to use suppression as a recurring theme through this entire piece. We discussed right here, as it says, ungodliness and unrighteousness violate God's righteous character. That's great. What are they? They're the same thing, right? Ungodliness, bad things. Unrighteousness, bad things. Sin, ungodliness, unrighteousness. So they're synonyms, but that's incautious. Because when the indictment comes down and it's pointed at you and it says you are guilty of unrighteousness, you're going to say, okay, so what exactly does that mean? And so Paul lays it out here. Ungodliness is sin or rebellion against God. Anything that opposes his character or existence is ungodly. It is unlike God's character. Now that's easy. But then you have to differentiate between sin and rebellion. And so easily, sin is missing the mark. We've heard that 1,000 times. We would tell that to our children. What was the one that was given me? I came to Christ roughly when I was 20. Throwing a baseball, that was what was given to me. So we lined up the strongest guys in a story, and so the weakest guy threw a baseball and it went 20 feet, and the strongest guy, he threw a baseball and it went 120 yards. But the goal was the moon. So nobody got close. We missed the mark. Easy to understand. Rebellion? Nobody likes rebellious children. No. When they purposely stand up and defy you, when they do it in the grocery store to their mother, and you just get that urge to intervene on that mother's behalf because of that wicked child's behavior, it's purposely hitting the wrong mark. My oldest daughter, who is a sweetheart, was the wickedest child you have ever been with. And it's not because she screamed and yelled and stole and cussed. She was just barely toddling around. But she had a game she liked to play to test her boundaries. She'd walk over, and I particularly remember one time I was going over some military paperwork, and I had to study it up because I was going to teach it. And she wanted it, and she took it. And I said, "Don't do that, baby. Put that down." And she reached for it again, and I said, "Okay, here's the game we're going to play. We don't touch this. And if you touch this, I'm going to smack your hand. Now, just to be clear, don't touch this, and if you do touch this, I'm going to smack your hand, and it's going to hurt." And so her immediate response was, "I'm sorry, Father. I didn't realize that I was in violation of your will." Of course not. But you know what she did do? She stood there and stared at it. And she didn't have pockets, but I have pockets. She had a diaper on, actually. She's staring at this thing, and she goes, and she looks directly at me, and I'm thinking to myself, there's no way she's considering if the consequence is worth the payout. And she took her hand up and went up in the air with it, and then looked at me, and then went halfway down, and I said, "Don't you dare, I had no idea what to say to you. Do not touch that paper." And she went like this. And so, of course, I immediately called my wife and asked her what was wrong with her daughter. I forgot to smack her hand, and then she immediately went into the defensive mode that her mother taught her, that when you want to get out of trouble, you got to be cute for Dad. So she started flapping her hands and going, blah, 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 and she crawled away. And I was befuddled that my child would act this way. God clearly says certain things, the most unpopular of which start with "thou shalt not." You could close your eyes and spin in a circle and point, and within 10 feet of you in any given place, at any given time, you'll find a person that has just done that thing. Why do we do that? Because sin. And it's really that simple. And Paul is going to explain that to us over and over. Unrighteousness is different because it too is ungodliness, but unrighteousness is directed at other people. My favorite stopping point on unrighteousness is injustice. Injustice is when you have been trusted with the rules, regulations, welfare, or goodness of somebody else. Bad parenting, that's injustice. God has trusted you with that child. And there is at least a cultural standard of how you treat children. You may spank, you may not spank. You may say certain things, you may not say certain things, but we don't lock our children in closets and not feed them. We don't leave them in their strollers and belt them in because they're a burden to us and we have partying to do and leave them there for days at a time. That is violating a trust. Israel got in trouble. One of the major things Israel gets in trouble with over and over and over is taking advantage of the fatherless and the widows. God has a very soft spot in his heart for justice because we have the rules and they're put in place for the goodness of society. Even unbelievers understand that the rules are in place for our good. But when somebody, especially somebody who knows the rules or is even an adjudicator of the rules, uses them, perverts them, or twists them for their own benefit over another person, that's unrighteousness. If they do it and twist it just to cause harm to somebody else, and I would argue that the most popular reason for that would be because they deserve it, they need to learn a lesson. It's amazing how often we would like to teach someone else a lesson, but we can't seem to learn the same ones ourselves. That's unrighteousness. When we deal with God's characteristics, we can go through a list of things. You say, what are the characteristics of God? And we can list off the things, the omniscience and the omnipresence and the omnipotence and the things that make him God, characteristics without which he could not be God. But to consolidate it down, to help somebody understand what would be disparate qualities in a human, you look at 4 fundamental ideas that appear over and over in the scriptures. And Pastor Clay brought these forward. This is his slide. I loved his presentation on this. I was able to sit under in Tullahoma. he refers to it as the integrity of God. Starts off with righteousness, which means you can always trust that God will do right. So God, Titus says that God, who cannot lie, promised this before the foundations of the world. God can do no wrong. Jesus Christ, even as a man, committed no sin. He was the example of righteousness. That is often paired in the scriptures, especially the Psalms, with justice. A person who can do no wrong would be the perfect candidate to mete out justice, because anything that appeared that was not righteous would be worthy of judgment, and you can trust this person to mete it out righteously because he himself can do no wrong. So even in the depth and the breadth of punishment, he would do no wrong. He would never go too far. Love. Here's where we start to have a problem. We start to short circuit and our little tiny brains just begin to smoke when we say God is love. I can't love unless God loves through me. I got it. It makes perfect sense. Love is good. I feel good when I love. I love chocolate. I loved that movie. I love you. I love ponies. Love is a very popular cultural term, and we're not going to get into the various iterations of the types of love that are used, especially in the Greek throughout the scriptures, but God being perfect love, all of a sudden, the moment we put that word love on the page next to justice and righteousness, and it occurs to us that if the justice and the righteousness is perfect, then of course it would demand recourse for unrighteousness and injustice. We start to lose control of our logic. God, who loves me so much that he gave his life for me, he loved me so much that his son died in my place so that I don't have to spend eternity without God, would allow death of a loved one, would demand that a person that we're very fond of, whose eulogy we're sitting under, we're pretty sure they weren't a Christian, we start to struggle with the idea that they're going to go to hell. Grandma was a sweetheart. She made phenomenal cookies. She knit me every pair of winter hat and gloves I ever had. I must have 7 scarves and a favorite quilted blanket. Every Christmas, she saved her Social Security and spent, on average, about $1,000 per child just to buy gifts. She called me precious. She told me, out of all her grandsons named Matthew, I was her favorite. There are no other grandsons named Matthew. That took me a while to catch on to that one. What if, now my grandma was a believer. I was 13 or 14 when she died. And it was hard for us because, of course, we love our grandmas. But what about that same grandma who lived her life a good person and died without Christ? In church, it makes sense when the preacher says, trust Christ. And we've even talked about the consequences. But then we get grandma, and we get that little picture and her chubby cheeks and her cute skirts and her pumps and her hair, whatever color it was this week, and the hugs and the smell and the emotions that are associated with the comforts. She never scolded me. My mom scolded me. My grandma loves me more than my mom does. And then we go, and she dies, and the preacher gets up there and says, I didn't know her very well, but if she trusted Christ, she's with the Lord right now. Anybody who can think goes, so then did she trust Christ? What kind of God would demand that payment from such a sweet person? The same kind of God that we call on when my village is overrun by violent militants and kills my family, my neighbor, steals my good. The justice makes sense then. The justice makes sense when somebody goes completely bonkers and causes a great swath of violence in a public school. God's justice, if your last name is Dahmer, God's justice makes sense. Interesting fact, I actually worked at a company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with a woman whose son was a victim of Jeffrey Dahmer. Do you know that she has a distinct belief in God's judgment? I got to talk to her about that. But you know, if she's human, there are things in her life that she just doesn't take too seriously because God's not going to, what does God care about that? I mean, it's wrong and I'm sorry I did it. But it's perfect justice. How do you measure that with love, and how do you measure that with truth? God's not going to lie for you on Judgment Day. At the Great White Throne Judgment, when the books are opened, and that book is opened, and we compare the deeds and look to see if our name is written in that final book of life, we're really hoping, because we're at the Great White Throne, that the scales measure at least 51% good. Big joke on everybody. Everybody is cast into the lake of fire. Brett has already covered that there is no amount of works we can do. Grandma can't be sweet enough to somehow circumvent the justice of God. This is a very grim section of Paul's argument. Well, let me comfort you. By the time we get to the final argument where he indicts everybody, he gives us God's solution to the problem. When you put all these, you often see justice and righteousness side by side in the Psalms, and you'll often see God's truth and love side by side in the Psalms. And we have at least one example where they all appear at the same time, and it's in Psalm 89. I'm going to just read it from here. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Loving kindness and truth go before you. What the righteousness of God demands, and it's very demanding, the justice of God executes. Now, if you left that all by itself, that should frighten you. Are you telling me that my infringement on the sensibilities of the Creator of the universe could lead to my destruction? It's exactly what that says. It was serious enough that he took Adam and Eve and cast them from the garden. All they did was eat some mysterious fruit for whatever motivation they may have had. Oops, I may have gone one too far. Motivated by the love of God, based on the truth of God, and expressed through the grace of God. And a wonderful closer to that is, and you can believe it because it's in the Word of God. Let's go here. When we look at creation, and I would like to read that again because it's easy to bump my gums and impress you with perspectives, but just to stay true to Paul's point, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against ungodliness in verse 18. Because that which is known about God in verse 19 is evident within them. Now I want you to hang on to that because the assumption there is there's something about the nature of God and knowing God that lives within you regardless of your social background. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. How did he make it evident to them? Verse 20, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen. You read in the Psalms, the heavens declare, they speak, without words, without utterance, regardless of language barriers, the heavens tell you all the preliminary things you need to know about God. And it goes on to say here, for at the end of, so we'll call it 20b, being understood through what has been made so that they are without excuse. But what about just don't waste your time. But there are people who've never heard that. I understand that. Okay, but what about babies? And that's a different subject altogether. But what about the mentally handicapped? I mean, okay, so they're adults and maybe they've heard the gospel, but they can't process. There's no excuse. I'm not saying God is hateful, that he's impatient. You're sitting in this pew, and if you're a believer, having been through the life you've been through, having done the things that you only know that you've done, God is eminently patient. He has tolerated you, and he's put you here, and he's letting you influence the lives of others for good, for his glory, despite yourself. That's a gracious and patient God. But if we want to stand up and say, I didn't know, wait a minute, I've written books on this, Lord, and you may have missed my arguments, but they're pretty good. And so now I understand, because every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. But to be fair, I wasn't clear up until just now. You are without excuse. Why am I without excuse? Because you purposed in your heart to disregard the truth, and you suppressed it. And what's worse, in the suppression of it, I gave you a gift of communication. You chose to use that gift to deny me. And the sad fact is, 313,147 people followed you, listened to you, watched you suppress the truth, and put the check mark in the box that said, I believe that there is no God. You, sir, are responsible for nearly 400,000 people who died and went to hell. That's the difference between compression and suppression. When I fall over and hurt somebody, it's an accident. It happens a lot on roller skates, guys, I'm telling you. But when I purpose to pin someone to the floor, cause them harm, or prevent them from gaining good, that's suppression. Man knows the truth of God's righteous character, but actively chooses to deny that truth. Every person possesses knowledge of God. This is very interesting. I'm going to read it here, and then we're going to end up here in a slide or two in the book of Ecclesiastes. So we're going to end up there, and we're going to discuss the eternity in the heart of man. In verse 19 here, because that which is known about God, stop. That's all you need to know. Because it is known. There's no question that you left with you left life completely devoid of any knowledge of something greater than you. There's no way. Guys, the argument of the prime mover, I am no great scientist, but the argument of the prime mover, the initial cause, is just this great point of religious faith in scientific circles. So we talk about background radiation and ages of stars and temperatures throughout the universe, and we talk about, my textbook in high school said, the universe began as a dot of matter no larger than a period at the end of this sentence. And then it erupted, and it produced this great and wonderful universe. And then some dumb kid said, but where'd the dot come from? Now, it's a humorous argument because we know how that conversation goes. We've either watched it happen on a debate online, read it in a book, saw it on a website, or had the discussion with somebody who wanted to talk to us about creation. But there's no answer. And it becomes a point of religious faith when they say, but maybe not in my lifetime. Maybe not in your lifetime. But generations from now, science is going to have the answer for that. Oh, really? Show me that written somewhere that's got any historical authority whatsoever, because I'm not comfortable with that answer. I'm not comfortable with there being an option that I might be offending the creator of the universe if I've got to wait generations after I'm already dead to know the truth. Every person possesses knowledge of God. It's assumed. All civilizations and cultures understand right and wrong, and this baffles me because God places it into the heart of every human being. Israel was given the Ten Commandments, and you can assume that neighboring nations, just by exchange, had exposure to the Ten Commandments. But at least in today's culture, not so much even when I was younger, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, but in today's culture there are people who couldn't name one Ten Commandment. They couldn't name one of the commandments written, general rules of social behavior. But if you said, okay, I've got 20 blanks on this paper, and I would like very much for you to just tell me what you think, as far as right and wrong goes, the top 20 worst things you could do to somebody that are, now, they've got to be considered universally wrong. And we'd go through a list, and they'd say, okay, murder, you don't do that. Forcing yourself on another person, that's inappropriate. Cheating, yeah, I wouldn't want my wife to cheat on me. What about lying? Yeah, at least some lies. I mean, lying's wrong. And they could generate the 10 Commandments, and I like to give them 20 shots at it because we have to cover some generalities and vagaries. How does that happen? Can you explain to me somehow, societally, how from whatever we call ancient history and the proliferation of information and the diversity of cultures from a biblical perspective, from the Tower of Babel, from the time of the leaving of the Ark to the Tower of Babel and the dispersion of the languages and the peoples, how did the information stay there? Well, verbal recitation of history. No, God wrote it on your heart. It's that simple. It sounds childish, but that's as simple as it gets. And that's why we have no excuse. Find me a culture that doesn't have a set of statutes. Better yet, find me a subculture that doesn't have a set of statutes. Okay? Consider this. Anarchists, anti-organization. And you can find that out by going to one of their meetings where they gather together as anarchists. As far as I'm concerned, having another friend who's an anarchist is kind of pushing the boundaries of being a genuine anarchist. But these people have a subculture. I worked in a maximum security prison. I treated a patient. I got an emergency call. Somebody had been gravely wounded, generally speaking, about the neck and head. And so I had to go do an emergency response. And I got there, and it looked much worse than it was. Lots of blood, head wounds looked bad. He was fine. He was able to communicate. Come to find out later, what happened was he had gotten too close to what they call general population. He was in a segregation tier. I didn't ask why. General population is where if you can generally behave amongst yourselves, you guys get to go to general population and you get more benefits. This man, as it turns out, was a child molester. Apparently, that's not acceptable in the prison system. Rape, that's fine. Murder, robbery, larceny, lying, cheating, stealing, coveting, hating, everything else that you can find is acceptable because it's got a contingency. This is why it happened, and this is my reason. You don't harm children in the prison system, and they're so serious about it, they'll kill you. How do they generate standards like that? Because the laws of God are written on our heart, and you're not going to find anybody anywhere. Now, they'll be bent. You watch any of the YouTube footage from New Tribes missions group, and they've got interesting stuff. There's a gentleman who's a missionary to a tribe. I'm going to say it's Papua New Guinea, but I could be mistaken. And he was teaching through Genesis, and he had great reception, and he got to the story of Jacob and Esau. And when Jacob deceived Esau, he was lauded as a hero. Because, as it turns out, we find out later in the story that lying is a virtue. The better the liar you are, the more that you can get from somebody by deception, the more clever you are. And it's akin to masculine virility in the Western world. It's just a different way to measure your success as a person. Romans 1:19c through 20, God's creation preaches the message of his existence. We discussed that in many of the Psalms, we see creation speaking to us, is what it says, with words, but it doesn't use specific words or languages. Anyone can understand it. God also has written eternity into everyone's heart. And this is an interesting verse for me. I had read it, but I had never had it brought to my attention until the DM2 conferences. Turn with me to Ecclesiastes. We're going to go to chapter 3. And we're going to just read verse 11. He has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in the heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. The yet is what gets me. The concept that there is a God above and beyond you, or he wouldn't be God, that he has this eternity thing that's going on outside of time, yet you're not going to be satisfied to understand the eternity or the nature of God outside of a relationship with God. You're not going to figure it out in a test tube. You're not going to figure it out with a series of tools that can measure scientific standards. You're not going to philosophize your way through it. You're not going to apply Western thought, Eastern thought, Middle Eastern thought to figure out the breadth and majesty of God. To prove it, go sit in on a meeting of your local religious group that's a non-biblical meeting, and you're going to come across some interesting concepts. Things like, the majority of them include works salvation, a certain level of human measured righteousness. Sometimes it includes intergalactic travel and ruling planets and various other oddities, some things that are culturally displeasing to us. They don't work, because when you follow them through logically, you've got to just subscribe or get off the bus. And thinkers choose not to subscribe, but they get worn out looking at all the philosophies of the world, and then they don't give Christianity a chance. And that's where we come in. We've got to make that argument. Without a relationship with God, which is Paul's push through all of the arguments of the immoral sinner, without that relationship, you're doomed. The creation testifies about the Creator's divine nature. Point 2 here, all people possess the mental capacity to recognize God's existence and are therefore without excuse. And we've read that twice. It is startling to me that he would say without excuse, because I can think of people who don't have, they just don't have a good grasp of fundamental concepts to even begin to understand the Scriptures. How are they going to grasp the eternity of God? How am I going to take somebody who doesn't understand the concept of a book written by a Spirit of God through a mortal man, presents us with everlasting truth that can't be contested? When they can't accept that and they put it on the shelf with other fantasies, there's Jesus and the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. And that's fine, because they're things that give your children comfort, and that's whatever works for you. When they can't understand the basic concepts that used to be a cultural norm, how are we going to get them to grasp general revelation and eternity? That's a challenge to me. When we explain creation, people say, how does it speak? You're going to go to the doctor and they're going to put you in the loony bin if you start telling them that birds are talking to you, or that the grass is speaking to you and telling you how to live your life, and God is talking to you through the stars, and they're going to ask you where you keep your tinfoil hat. And I've met these people, I've worked with them, and there are people who believe these things. The concept is a general revelation, and so we picture it as this radio tower that's broadcasting all the time. Every single one of us is given the capacity to receive. Now, there is no specificity of signal strength. Some of us have a capacity, others have a greater capacity, others have a lesser capacity. The truth that's important to keep in mind is that the fact of God's existence comes through creation, the things that we see that the Bible says testify to us, and it broadcasts 24/7. No matter where you are, no matter who you are, if you have the ability to interact with your environment, you have to ask questions. And those questions come as a result of exposure to creation. Now, the problem with owning a radio, the problem with being a creation with volition, is that we have the option to leave that radio in the off position. We do not have to choose to hear the message. And that seems like a far stretch for us, because we love to hear the words of God. They are truth, and gathering together with His people in His local gathering, that is a thrill to me. People of like mind, to watch men I respect bow their knee to the Creator and to submit themselves to something greater than themselves, and then to share prayer time with me, that is precious. And it didn't used to be. What was precious came at the bottom of a beer bottle to me, or had a cute laugh and batted her eyelashes. That used to be precious to me. And I left my radio turned off until I was past my 20s. Statistically speaking, if I didn't get saved before I was 18, I wasn't going to get saved. Gallup polls and various polls say 75% of people who claim to be born-again Christians, it happens before their 18th birthday. So we've got this eternity that's written in our heart, and it is going to help us come to the knowledge of God, or it's going to be the thing that condemns us, because remember, we are without excuse. When we leave it in the off position, we are purposely choosing to do so, because there's no getting around the fact. There's no volume issue and there's no amplitude issue with the signal. Creation is broadcasting, and we are capable to receive that. We have to choose to suppress the truth, and we do that simply by choosing not to listen, or by choosing to believe something else. I'm having difficulty. I'm going to just go to the next slide here. It's not wanting to go forward. The downward descent of man. We're going to read now from Romans 1:21-31, and I'm going to be as efficient as possible here. For even though they knew God, they did not honor Him, verse 21, as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. That's why it's called a downward spiral. The heart darkens. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of a corruptible man, and of birds, and four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. Therefore, God gave them over in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator. They blurred that distinction. Who is blessed forever, amen. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions. For their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way, also the men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire toward one another, men with men committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper. Being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice, they are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, and unmerciful. That certainly is a downward spiral. God is correct in condemning immoral sinners because they have rejected the truth. Remember, we're talking about people who have made a decision to stand against the truth. Let's look at the downward descent of sinful humanity. In Romans 3:21, man's depravity deserves judgment. Ignorance of God comes with a price tag. While you're filling in your blanks, I'm going to read you Romans 3:21. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. Even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all those who believe, for there is no distinction. The U.S., of course, in its inception had some difficulty with determining exactly what the verses meant when they said there is neither Jew nor Greek, nor bond, nor free, nor male, nor female. We have that difficulty culturally, but there is no distinction. We may choose to enforce distinctions, but when it comes to being in Christ, there is no distinction, and that man's depravity deserves judgment. Just as there is freedom for every single person to trust Christ and come to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, we have the same option across the board to deny Him and choose to live in eternity without Him. Futility. Failure to recognize God as Creator and give Him all honor has grave consequences. When you hear the word futility, I would like you to think of somebody fighting an unwinnable fight. We're taking up arms against the Creator when we stand in suppression of the truth. When I say, as a fool, there is no God, I suppress the truth because in my behavior, I choose to reject the truth, and then I teach that to anybody who's going to listen to me. I'll start with my kids. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to start with my children. I will suppress the truth and teach them. But by the grace of God, they're going to believe me because they love me. And I'm going to raise them in unbelief. And they are going to be facing an eternity without Christ because of my suppression. This stuff, don't get me wrong. We allow people to believe what they want because that is volition. We have founded our country on freedom and freedom of choice. But the consequences are grave. The consequences are brutal, is a word I like to use at that. In 121, they knew not God, didn't honor Him, and their foolish heart was darkened. We say the foolish heart was darkened. It doesn't sound as bad as it really is. A dark heart with receipt of no light is going to spiral into depravity. And we're going to see that futile thinking results from not honoring God as Creator. Futile thinking produces wrong reasoning, which results in ignorance, which leads to idolatry. How does that happen? Let's read Ephesians chapter 4, verses 17 through 19. And we're going to read and learn just a quick little study here on idolatry and the consequences therein. So this I say and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer, just as the Gentiles also walk, in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their hearts. You did not learn Christ this way, in verse 20. If indeed, verse 21, you have heard Him and have been taught in Him, just as the truth is in Jesus, that in reference to your former manner of life, you lay aside the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lusts of deceit. Okay, we're going to compare that now with Colossians 3, verses 5 through 6. Therefore, consider the members of your earthly body as dead to immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which amounts to idolatry. Now, every time I said the word idolatry, because you're humans and we communicate with words that become pictures, you saw little naked stone idols. You saw pictures from movies of bloody altars and dead bodies. You saw figures in mystical churches filled with incense, with their hands raised to heaven, with children in their bosoms who are either a redemptress or a co-redemptress, depending on your position. You see lots of things, but you didn't look at yourself. And that's just our nature. It's not because you're particularly wicked. It's exactly the position I'm in, and that's the way that I see things. But as it's written here, as dead to immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which amounts to idolatry. When we see those idols in our minds and we go to Discovery Channel, if you're like me and you're an Eastern and you take courses on Eastern religions, you've got to look at the value of an idol and listen to people wax eloquent about the virtues of their idols. We see exactly what we should be seeing. We just forget to apply it to our own lives. We see a little figure with arms that can't move and ears that can't hear, eyes that can't see and lips that can't offer comfort. We have a God who, when we need him to come to our rescue, we got to put him in a bucket and take him to the scene of the problem. We have to roll him in a barrel. He has no strength. And then we bow ourselves down according to the rule set of this God, and we start going by the numbers, doing A and B and C and D to appease him. It's a very interesting cycle we get involved in, because what are we appeasing them for? Why do we sacrifice our children in the fire to Molech, Israel? Why do we take our captives and offer their bodies on an altar to the sun god? We are doing this to appease the wrath that this God is raining down on us. And we know there's wrath because there's suffering. My crops got bugs. Clearly God's mad at me. The reason it's appealing, because from our perspective, we think, why wouldn't you go to a God who loves you and wants only good for you? It's because the price of worshiping a God, a creator who loves you and wants only good for you, who happens to also be perfect righteousness and justice, the consequences are you've got to submit yourself to a rule set that is beyond your capability to fulfill. It's much easier to carve a little dumpy person with nubbins for ears and a pot belly and go to them and offer them rice and cakes under this new rule set that's much easier. That, by the way, I had a little hand in putting together. And I can find myself meeting the standards, even if those standards are violent. And why are they violent and depraved? Because our hearts are violent and depraved. And when we go looking for justice, it's a whole different kind of justice than we find from the God in the Bible. Ephesians 4:17 through 19, idolatry is a religious system. Whether it's the passions of your life or it's a little idol, it's a religious system. It's typically involving some sort of image which represents a deity. And what we're looking at here are pictures of Egyptian gods. And it's an example used because they had deities for everything. They had deities for bugs and bodily functions and seasons. And the only way to go one step farther was to be a Greek and to have the catch-all altar to the unknown God, just in case you had offended one of them. Idolatry produces immorality that leads to the destruction of a culture. Sounds like a great generalization, but if we put that together with what he called idolatry in Colossians, we know that it is associated with our depravity. What do you expect to happen to a culture if you're making the rules yourself and you are fundamentally depraved? You get San Francisco. We like to point our fingers, don't we? We can think of Western cities that are completely falling apart. It's not new. Sodom and Gomorrah were the same way. There is a very graphic representation of what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, and it's startling even to a modern Western reader that those men would, in their anger, want to force he offered his daughters as a consolation prize to these men. And these men said, no, you're not going to give us what we want. We're going to take it, and you with it. Holy cow, what is wrong with you people? What kind of society does that happen in? Oh, I'll tell you, an idolatrous one that functions on depraved standards. Believers are susceptible to idolatry. No, we're not. Yes, you are. If you weren't susceptible to idolatry, it wouldn't have been one of the fundamental commandments in the 10 ones labeled on tablets of stone. Have no other gods before me. Make no images of anything in heaven or the earth below or the sea. Do not bow yourselves down before them. I wouldn't do that. You wouldn't. Well, okay, maybe you haven't recently, but what is it that you're putting first? Remember, he said they weren't thankful in a previous verse. So when you find yourself thankful for something in life, oh, baby, thank you, that was really great. If you don't, in your heart, share that thanks with God, you have misapplied your thanks. I'm sorry, it sounds very extreme, but I want you to consider on a more human level, when Christmas comes or a birthday comes and a child opens that gift, and you're pretty thrilled because you know it's coming Christmas Day. We do the 12 days of Christmas, so we start on the 14th, and we open a gift every day until Christmas Day, and we always save the big ones for Christmas Day. And the test is, 3 days in, when they open a box of socks, are they thankful? Because when they go, I'm so excited, and they open it and they go, oh, it's socks. I don't do it to be mean. They need socks. And we buy them cute socks. They have mushrooms and cookies on them. They're girly socks. They're wonderful. But they're excited about what's coming, and the excitement could build and lead them to be disappointed. And you know how I feel? I'm gracious. I understand. But the first couple times it happened, I forgot to be gracious, and we stopped Christmas. Because nobody likes an ungrateful child. How much more the creator of the universe, who gives us not a box of socks plus all the goodness of a house and home, but he provides the very air you breathe. He provides every electrical impulse that somehow mysteriously propels your wicked little heart from day to day, and he tolerates your foolishness knowing that you are eventually, by exposure to good preaching and teaching, going to be guided in the paths of righteousness. And then we go, no, what has God done for me? Why do I need him? What have I done for you? That makes me angry. And every now and then, God's wrath descends on the ungrateful. Pride. Man calls his speculations wisdom, but in reality, his thinking is foolishness. We don't need to beat this one, guys. Find your favorite philosophy. Find your favorite problematic Bible verse where some unbeliever brings forth a railing act. My first Bible verse somebody brought to me when I was a new Christian was reading about the locust and the description of the locust in, Leviticus. And it said the locust and his 4 legs. And he goes, really? Really? Your God's so perfect he doesn't know locusts have 6 legs? That's embarrassing, guys. You want to focus on Jesus, you want to focus on creation, 7 literal days and 24-hour periods. That's cute. Could you explain, do they have different locusts in Israel? I'm sorry, is there a breed of locust we're missing that only has 4 legs? And do you know that really rocked me? I was like, holy cow. If it's wrong about the number of legs on a locust, what else is it wrong about? Turns out that when you ask a Jew how many legs a locust has, he says 4. But he's got 2 arms. Oh, well, that's different. That still makes 6. The arguments and the contentions are foolishness. You feel foolish when you don't have the right answer. Okay, study to show yourself approved. Guard the word of God, hide it in your heart, be prepared always to give an answer to them that ask of the hope that is within you, with meekness and with fear. You're not an encyclopedia. If an unbeliever is not willing to accept, I'll get back to you with that, they're not willing to accept anything. They are prideful against God. They are suppressing the truth. Let me tell you guys, I don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about things I don't believe in. I've never once stayed up at night wondering where my tooth went and where the dime came from. Is there really a tooth fairy? Because that would mess everything up. Jesus didn't account for fairies. Do fairies go to heaven when they die? What if there are aliens? Is there a different gospel on a different planet with a different savior? How are they going to heaven? It says all men. What are they? What if they're different species? Are they men? Is it a general term? These things don't bother me. I don't believe in them. I don't think they're issues. I'd be willing to listen to your conjecture, but that's all it is. Don't tell me you don't believe in God, and then you spend every waking moment, every conversation, every day, every web search, and every book you read has to do with proving there's no God. You're not fooling anybody. The knowledge of God, we've already addressed that. It's in your heart. I've been in the military. I've been under gunfire. I've been in violence. I've seen people hurt, maimed, and destroyed. Nobody's an atheist with a bullet in their leg. First words out of their mouth, oh God. Darjarney, help. Doc, help. I don't want to die. Perversion. In some fashion, the term has become very focused in our society, but in some fashion, you're a pervert. Man perverts his responsibility towards God and creates gods he can manipulate and control. We are warned in our lives that as we present the gospel, we do it in a biblical fashion. We do it as speaking the words of God. When we choose to pick a belief, a teaching, a doctrine of men, maybe patriarchal passing on of historical beliefs that the forefathers in the church before us have taught, and we add them as some sort of supplement to the scriptures, you have perverted your responsibility, you've perverted the truth of God, and you're suppressing the truth. You're going to find that every time Paul indicts somebody of pride, distortion, or perversion, it all comes down to suppression. Because everything that you're doing, whether it's prideful, distorted, or perverted, results in your neglect of the truth. And when you neglect the truth, people who look up to you, people who consider your points of view, people who are under you in authority, are going to follow in your footsteps, at least to some degree. You have suppressed the truth to the harm of somebody else, and because that has a result that affects another human, that's unrighteousness. Ephesians 5:6. Just go ahead and read that real quick. I'd like you to turn to Genesis chapter 3. I will read you Ephesians. My big mouth is going to get me in trouble for time, so I'm going to clip this just a little bit short here. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Somebody deceives you with empty words and God's wrath descends. Why is that? Suppression, perversion, distortion. It's always about ignoring the truth. And the entire argument in chapter 1 from verse 18 to verse 32 has to do with perversion of responsibility, distortion of truth, and suppression. Genesis 3:4, we know the story. Eve, we assume, we can make any assumptions we want. You don't have to be dogmatic about it, but she's been informed, at least by God, not to touch the fruit on this one tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. She comes up with the idea that not only when she's questioned by the serpent, not only should we not eat it, but we should not touch it. There's an interesting conjecture out there that it's because when we were discussing the tree, why do you think God doesn't want us to eat that tree? I don't know. Just don't go near it. Don't touch it. So she adds a little bit, starts to blur the lines of God's actual command, the serpent, and he challenges her, yea, hath God said, if you're reading the King James, yea, hath God said, thou shalt not surely die. Blatant lie. There's no getting around that. It's not a philosophical point. He just directly challenged God's statement. So the first lie that we're fed and that the culture has bought is that you're not going to die. Or, in the worst case, when you die, you're not going to know it because that's all there is. The second lie brought to Eve in the garden was that you will be enlightened. Now, maybe 100 years ago, this had a different flavor than it does in our culture today. But in our culture today, can you think of a single group of people who teaches it's not salvation, it's exaltation? And when they define that word, they mean they are being enlightened to the level, and they will be, not even as gods, but they will be gods. There are people that will come to your door and they will teach you this. And they will teach you that once you are God's, because you're the faithful, and you're the faithful if you pay X and do these series of things and attend church faithfully, you're going to be faithful, you're going to get your own planet, and you're going to get to rule that thing. And you are going to get to be righteous and a governing God, just like Elohim God does for us here on earth. That's a lie, and it's not unique. They didn't have to work hard to get that. That enlightenment that we see in Eastern religions and mysticisms that we're always looking for, that if you just behave this way and you deprive yourself enough that you will be enlightened, that's not new. That was offered to Eve as the very product of questioning God's motives behind his command. You will be as God, knowing good from evil. No, you won't. You'll be made in his image. That's what happened. Let us make man after our likeness in our image. You will not be God. And as a warning, we have it written in the scriptures, what happens when you conjecture, I will be like the Most High. I will ascend the throne of heaven. I will be. And Lucifer got himself cast out for that sort of talk. You make the standard. I want to read this one here now. In Genesis 3, and the end of verse 5, I'm going to just do the whole verse. Now, no shrub, wrong verse, sorry. There we go. For God knows that in the day you eat from it, the tree, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So what is the benefit of knowing good and evil, if you can call it a benefit? We now have a far left and a far right. We know what really good is and we know what really bad is. And now, if I could just take those standards and modify them to the behaviors I like and that I'm comfortable with, and then maybe impose those rules onto a new religious rule set that we can associate with an idol, I get to make the standards. We have disparities in what's right and wrong in various cultures, but we have right and wrong. We've already covered that. When you get to make the standard, you have transgressed in maybe the greatest of ways by assuming the right of God to determine what is right and wrong. Mikhail Gorbachev has this crazy quote. This is what happens when you get to decide for yourself. Whatever you believe is fine. Whatever works for you, that's great, just as long as you're a good person. The funny part is we have a hard time determining what a good person means. Well, I believe in the cosmos. All of us are linked to the cosmos. Look at the sun. If there's no sun, then we cannot exist. So nature is my God. To me, nature is sacred. Trees are my temples, and forests are my cathedrals. And what can you do with that? You can say, that man is in a deep descent, and he's desperately in need of an evaluation of his position, right? Romans chapter 1, verses 23 and 24. I'm going to read this for you out of the King James. And change the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and to four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Did it ever occur to you that one of the greatest offenses these people have perpetrated on the creator of the universe is that they associated him with a dirty little snake, or a creepy little critter, the white elephant, or the sacred cow? We can't clean the muck from the cows out of the streets because it's sacred? That's what our God is associated with. Denial of the living God results in idolatry. They exchange the glory of the incorruptible God for an image. Jeremiah, that section in Jeremiah chapter 10 is that discussion about what can your God that you have built do for you. And I'm not the only one that's ever read through the scriptures when the Lord has said to Israel, don't call me in your time of distress. Call on your gods and let them help you. For they cannot hear you, they cannot come to your aid, and they can't raise a finger to assist you in your time of need. Don't call me. You wanted it, you got it. God gives them over to impurity, or to the impurity they desire. Now this is the terrible thing. When you get what you want, every single one of us has heard the maxim, do what feels good. Follow your heart. I can't tell you the number of times I hear that in the Derby community. These girls are emotional. If I could give you a cross-section of the kind of person it is, they've got emotional trouble and abuse in their backgrounds, and they're liberating themselves through this great new sport, and it's women power. And I'll tell you what, they get in trouble, and they have decisions to make, and they have relationship troubles. And they counsel each other with, girl, if it doesn't make you feel good, don't do it. Are you kidding me? Okay, so you're tubby, and you want to be in a sport that requires athleticism. So when I make you skate faster than you want to skate, for longer than you want to skate, to get your tubby little body in shape, does that make you feel good? No? Then don't do it. How are you going to reap benefit in life unless you do things you don't want to do? But on the contrary, if we are allowed to do, and we are, anything we want to do, depravity is the only end. They exchange the glory of the incorruptible God for an image. God gives them over to impurity. Those two spaces there. God allows them to dishonor their own bodies. In 124, the most argued for position against homosexuality in the church and the most hated verses against homosexuality in the Bible argued against. Liberal Christians would even argue that the reason God is judging them is because they didn't go against nature, they went against their nature. They went against their heterosexuality, and that's why their judgment came. And he would have judged a homosexual the same way if they had perverted their homosexuality. That kind of thinking, that purely rotten and depraved and decaying thought, is what comes when we are allowed to establish our own religious reality and build our own gods and make our own rule set because we're finite. We have no ability, though eternity resides in our heart, and we want to tell ourselves cultural story after cultural story about eternity. We cannot grasp it, Ecclesiastes said, without a relationship with the actual creator of the universe. And it becomes impurity and it becomes dishonor. The defilement of idol worship results in their degradation. It's another point that I had never considered. They degrade themselves by subjecting themselves to something they created in their fantasy and built with their own hands. I don't care how great a craftsman you are, you can't recreate what God did with this body. And you're going to subject yourself to a goddess of fertility and immorality? That's what you're going to subject yourself to? When we think we're in our right thinking, in our right minds, we watch women act in ways that seem to put themselves of no value. They parade themselves around in scantily clad outfits. They over-sexualize themselves, or they tolerate the over-sexualization of the culture because it's what is making them feel pretty. And then from there, we watch them go into a spiral from bad relationship to bad relationship, and we weep and we cry and we pray for them as they degrade themselves. But did it ever occur to you that when you subject yourself to something other than absolute truth, written into general creation revelation and specific scriptural revelation, when you subject yourself to anything else, you have degraded yourself because you have been made in the image and likeness of God. So, God gives you over to your degrading passions. There comes a day when he will just let you destroy yourself. Now, don't tell me you read a study that says certain types of lifestyles are no more destructive than other kinds of lifestyles. Because though the numbers may pan out and agree with you or disagree with you, depending on which study you're pursuing, this culture is falling apart. No, it's disingenuous to say it's because specifically of one type of behavior. But we are falling apart. We are degrading because we have suppressed the truth and denied the Creator. God calls this resulting prostitution that is happening in the unnatural uses of the bodies unnatural. Well, that's not hard to see. How are we going to keep the commandment to be fruitful and multiply if we've decided the relationship that God has for me is completely incapable of producing offspring? It's unnatural. The emotional subset that goes with it, it's unnatural. It's not how God made it. It does not follow the order of creation. God calls the resulting homosexuality indecent and destructive. Now wait, that doesn't make your heterosexual indecency any better. Indecency is indecent, but I appreciate that the Lord takes such a touchy subject that's so contemporary today and labels it for me so that I don't have to be wishy-washy about it, regardless of how I feel about my dear, dear friend who's a lesbian, who I hope someday is going to come to Christ. Regardless of how I feel about her emotionally, I I can't in good conscience say it's anything other than indecent. I just have to find a loving way to say that to her and then to get her the gospel and hope that Jesus delivers her like he delivered me from my foolishness. Romans 1:28 through 31, which comes to the end of this section, all except the final verse, their disavowal of their knowledge of God results in atheism. Now look at this interesting line of reasoning. The behavior resulted in idolatry because we have this need to worship. We have a need to subject ourselves. It just turns out we're degrading ourselves doing so, as well as degrading the creator of the universe. And then as this goes on, it becomes perversion and physical inward destruction of the body, and then the family unit, and then the community, and then the culture eventually. And, you don't have to look at the American model. There's plenty of other models that have done this same series of events and destroyed themselves. We're just, following the same path. The interesting part to me was that it eventually resulted in atheism. But when you think about it, what else can it do? Because you went to the effort of having faith, and that's a virtue. You gotta have faith, and you gotta believe, and you gotta trust, and God's gonna give you, and it doesn't come. But the preacher's got it, right? He's definitely got it, but it's because he's got more faith. And you try, man, you try, and you pray harder, and you do harder, and you work harder, and you cry more, and you witness, and you alienate people, and you set them at odds against you because, dagnabbit, I am going to get this thing, and God's going to give. And you know what? He didn't give because I still don't have any money. I don't have a car. I'm given. What I do have, I'm given. And you know what happens to your faith? Well, you put it in the wrong place. You had an idol. You had an idol that was a Jesus that was going to give you $1 for every time you prayed. That's not a true representation. That's suppressing the truth. If you teach your kids that, you're leading them down a path that's destructive. You teach your neighbor that, you're lying and misrepresenting the truth. And you know what eventually happens? Logic sets in and you're like, oh, this isn't working. I worked so hard. And it didn't work. God didn't pan out. Wait, maybe it's because he's not really there. When we built the standard with our own hands and then wrote the rule set down, and we took some modification. It looked a little wacky at the beginning, but we put enough philosophy and learned words next to it, and we added, to make it sound more credible, we went to the large religions who have been doing it right for many years and took their key words, tweaked their meaning so that it would match our flavor, and we had a successful thing, man. It was going good for a while. But it just finally dawned on me, I've been lying this whole time. And we come to the knowledge of the truth that we were wrong. We don't take the next step and say, God, you were right. We become atheists. And we spend the rest of our lives using that energy that we were using for God to convince ourselves there is no penalty for my foolishness because there's no God. And if I can just find that last piece of evidence, if I can find the God particle, the Higgs boson nutmeg 4000 molecule that is the precursor to all creation, it would explain the period on the end of this page that burped and became the universe. And once I had that one piece of information, I'm no longer under a threat of judgment. So God gives them over to depraved minds. You have to be depraved to believe the things they're teaching us in school today. And they multiply their degradation through innumerable sins. Very interesting thing about this immoral section is that when you read this list of innumerable sins in 29 through 31, it sounds like this. Being filled with all unrighteousness. That was injustice now, remember. Fornication, which, by the way, you can do with your mind. Wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit. Debate? I thought that was a healthy part of a communication culture. It's interesting. Deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters. That's for those of us who like to perpetuate rumors. And do you know that you can be guilty of backbiting without being guilty of lying? Just want to say, for those of you who live in a world where you say things to yourself, I just want to be real, and I want people to know that I speak the truth, that you can perpetuate a rumor even if it's true. Just thought I'd throw that out there. There are things that are true about me. It's none of your business to spread around to other people. The Bible deals with how to handle that. You're a backbiter. You need to stop it, right? I need to stop it. I'm guilty of it. Haters of God, and we're getting close to the final landing of this descent. We're spiraling down. Now everything's gone bad for so long that we give up. Matter of fact, we're mad at God about it. And despiteful, proud, boasters. Do you see the cycle here? What's God done for me? There is no God. Now I'm a good person because I haven't eaten anybody. Give me a break, people. God's not going to judge me. I've done some bad. I took some paper clips at work, and I wasn't supposed to do that, but I'm sorry about it. Boasters. I wouldn't do that, by the way. I wouldn't boast. I am capable of some pretty phenomenal things. I'm an exceptional person in many areas. I'm a physical specimen. Well, I should say I spend a lot of time in the mirror when no one's looking, but it's not a boast, it's a fact. Okay, it's a fact that I have mental acuity and that I'm charming and that boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful. The one thing we demand from everybody when we do wrong is the one thing we refuse to give them when they do wrong. The sins, people, are innumerable. Romans 1:32, the very last verse of this section, their defiance of God and their flirtation with death result in reprobation. They are reprobates. They know they know that their actions deserve death, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, who knowing the judgment of God, they know that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do it. You ever wonder about that person who was the instigator in your social group? He wouldn't do the bad, but he would encourage you to do the bad. Which one of you was wrong? God's got a heavy opinion about that person who encourages wickedness and takes pleasure in those that do it. Misery loves company. I'm miserable in my lifestyle, but I'll tell you what, we're going to have a parade, and I'm going to tell everybody with my charm, my wit, and my intellect that it's the right way to live and that that's how God made me, and we're going to march hand in hand, and you are going to accept me or we're going to mow you down. They personally dare God. Can you believe sticking your finger in the face of God and going, I dare you to have an opinion about this. You did this to me. Oh, the presumption. They not only do the same, but they encourage others to defy God. They give hearty approval to those that practice those evil deeds. Romans 3:23 is a very popular verse for those of us who have loved and used the Romans road. We have in Romans 3:23, I know the King James Version by heart, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. There is a solution, there is a way to be reconciled with God, but there's no chance to accept or to attain that reconciliation until you first realize that you're guilty. And when you look back at what Paul just threw at us for the immoral sinner, there's a lot of personal problems to get through. There's a lot of pride, hate, and malignity that goes on from me towards God that I have to deal with when I deal with my own sin. People want to accept that they have sinned. They don't want to accept that they're a sinner. Philippians 2:6-8. Who, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. Remember, it was presumption when we made ourselves equal with God. But being in the form and likeness of God, it is not presumption, being God himself, to make yourself equal with God. He made himself subservient to the will of God, a servant to sinful man, and suffered and died and paid the penalty for sin for everybody, offering reconciliation. But without the realization of what goes on in the heart in Romans 3:23, that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, there cannot be reconciliation. Two parties can't be reconciled until they both understand the other person's position. And God's position is that you're under his judgment and worthy of death. there's that precious thing, and history doesn't have a picture for us on what that actually looked like. We do know there were 3 of them, and the one that was of the most value to us was the one where an innocent lamb was slain in the form presented to us in Levitical sacrifices and offerings, and the blood that was shed, the death, the spiritual death that was experienced on that cross, was propitiatory, meaning it was acceptable. And that should be a moment of rejoicing even for a believer, because despite our continued failures as a Christian, they have been dealt with and addressed here at the cross. And thank God for 1 John 1:9 that it says if we confess those sins that we have trouble with, He's faithful and just to forgive us of those sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. 2 Corinthians 5:21 is a wonderful place to go when you're dealing with the concept of this disparity in relationship between man and his Creator. For He hath made Him to be sin for us who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in Him. When man raises his finger and says, it's not fair that you judge me, God can return and say, but it's not fair that my Son had to die for you, for He knew no sin. And when it comes to the comparison, despite the fact that you think it's unfair, you admit you're wicked. But my Son was without spot or blemish. Which one was least fair? It's not fair that you're shaking your finger at me. It's not fair that you're unthankful. It's not fair that you're bitter. For every good thing you've ever had, and every moment of love you've experienced in your life, and every treasure you've ever treasured, I gave to you on purpose, to you specifically, not generally, to you. And you're shaking your fist in my face. That's not fair. 1 Timothy 2, verses 5 through 6, and I'm going the wrong way here. For there is one God and one mediator, and that mediator was our only hope between God and man, the man Christ Jesus, who gave Himself a ransom to purchase us back from the penalty of our sin, to be testified in due time. And here we stand today as Christians, and we're supposed to tell our culture about this Savior. And I'm grateful that despite myself, we have the product of what the Holy Spirit has begun to do through DM2, a series of tools that we can sit down with 1 hour at a time, 30 minutes at a time, with somebody who's willing to listen and go step by step. And even if you're not familiar with all the tools involved, and you can give a clear presentation of the gospel to people who have never heard the Word of God. Can you believe that there are people out there who still don't know that there was a person named Jesus and that He allegedly died for the sins of the world? That's a horrible, horrible place to be. But we have the opportunity to go and share that with people. Where did I go? Okay, 1 Corinthians 5:20. Did I already hit that one? I thought so. That's all right. Thank you, brother. 2 Corinthians 5:20. Now when we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God did beseech you by us, we pray you in Christ's stead, be ye reconciled to God. You can plead with a person and you can offer them their condition, but without a solution, the reconciliation to the God that would otherwise judge them for their wickedness, there's no hope for them. But the book of 1 Thessalonians says we are not as they that have no hope. We as Christians and believers have hope. And on our worst day, in our worst state, in our worst physical or financial condition, in the worst mistake you've ever made in your relationship, with the worst misstep you have ever in your Christian life made against God, you still have hope, because after it's all over, you could very well hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter ye into the joy of your Lord. It is suppression of the truth to not share that with people who've never heard that. They know what jerks they are. They know how they live. They know what they've done wrong. They just need to know how God treats that in the grand scheme of justice and what the penalty for that is, and then offer them that reconciliation. That's what being a neighbor is all about. 2 Corinthians 5:19. I was right there just now. To wit, that God was in Christ, reconciling the world to Himself, not imputing their trespasses unto them, and hath committed unto us the word of reconciliation. You can be free of your trespass. And if that's not exciting, No, we have a problem that hasn't been dealt with at the most fundamental level. We're going to continue to make mistakes. And I encourage you to sin not. My brethren, sin not. But when you do sin, we have a mediator, a propitiation, and we have one that stands between the creator of the universe and your sinful sack of flesh. And he's there so that you can be found righteous and free of your trespasses. God is willing to not impute your trespasses to you. That's exciting. Praise the Lord. Okay, so let's close this out. The gospel of grace. We started in chapter 1, verses 1 through 17. Accountable for the gospel, his accountability in that his direction was to go and share the gospel, so he was a debtor to everyone because of the gospel. Chapter 1, verses 6 through 7 addresses the Romans. Aspirations in the gospel we find in chapter 1, verses 8 through 15. Acclamation of the gospel, great. I really enjoyed that, brother. I appreciate that, by the way. Salvation to all who believe, chapter 1, verses 16 through 17. And the three types of sinners, the first of which I dealt with in, it's supposed to be 18, I think, through 32. Is that right, brother? And I have got to represent the immoral sinner. And so the next section will handle the moral sinner. Thanks for your patience with me. I appreciate you, and God bless you. I think I'm done.